I'm going to tell you a story, and you need to figure out which part isn't true. Which part, based on your common sense and experience, just wouldn't happen the way that I'm saying that it did. A passenger plane crashes in a field. The crew and the passengers are all killed instantly. The National Transportation Safety Board, the NTSB, rushes to the scene. They immediately locate and recover the flight data recorder and the cockpit voice recorder. They then begin collecting all the debris from the plane in the field that they can find. In a nearby warehouse, they begin reconstructing all that debris in an effort to figure out what caused the crash. After working tirelessly for months and holding many public hearings, the NTSB issues their report. They say that a manufacturing defect in the plane, in a small part of the plane, caused the chain of events that resulted in the crash. They say, however, that there's nothing to fear, that all the other planes of the same make and model, even the ones that had that same part that turned out to be defective, they're all fine, because it was just the one plane. Now, which part doesn't seem quite right to you? I'm guessing you figured it out right away, so let's talk about it for a second. I think we all know that the NTSB would never say that it was just the one plane. They would treat the error as systemic by default, and they would insist that all the other planes of the same make and model, whether it had that part that turned out to be defective or not, that all those planes should be grounded, that they should all be inspected, and that they should all have the repair be certified or an explanation given of why that part didn't need to be repaired. And now treating errors as systemic by default is one of the reasons, frankly, maybe the reason, that the airline industry is among the safest forms of travel and has been for decades. Now, the criminal legal system, by contrast, treats its errors in exactly the opposite way. It treats every error like a one-off, a bad apple. So, sort of like the stereotypical policeman at a crime scene, telling everyone there's nothing to see here, just move along. Now, I came across an example of this phenomena recently in one of the cases I was looking at. I was looking into an old murder case from the 1970s, and it became clear pretty quickly that the prosecutor was striking all the available black jurors. The result was an all-white jury. The defendant was black. I asked a couple prosecutors what they thought, and they both said, well, he probably had a reason for doing that, or, it's just that one case, I wouldn't worry about it. So I didn't really accept those answers, so I dug a little more. And I quickly found 4 or 5 other cases from the same county, from the same time period, where essentially the same thing was happening. Black jurors were being struck to get all-white juries that ended up trying cases involving black defendants. Now, I knew an attorney at around this time, or I had met an attorney from around this time when I was looking into that case, who had been a prosecutor in a different county way back when, in the 70s. And I asked him about it, and he said, it was just the way things were done at the time. He goes, if I had a domestic violence case, I'd strike all the women. He goes, if it was a criminal case with a black defendant, I'd strike all the black jurors. He goes, I know it was wrong. And he goes, I feel terrible about it. But he's like, at the time, no one even questioned it. It's just the way things were done. Now, I bring this up for 2 reasons. One, I bring it up to show how quickly one case with a little digging turned into 4 or 5 more, and then with a little more digging, sort of asking around, turned into potentially many, many more cases. The other reason I bring it up is to show how deep the roots are in the criminal legal system of this kind of conduct. And that when you start to challenge it, when you start to look at it in different ways, you start hearing excuses or hearing even little whispers in your own ear. Well, maybe he did have a reason, or I don't know, maybe it was okay. Maybe I'm not reading this right. Now, I believe these little whispers exist in our ear for a reason, and that's to make things less scary. Because if something's a one-off, if it's an exception, then it's much less scary to humans than if something's the rule, the way things are. But these whispers in our ear, they play on our fear and emotions and our ignorance, which is why they can't stand facts and truth. And what they really can't stand is when you start talking about statistics and start talking about the broader brush of this kind of conduct. And for that reason, let's talk about some statistics. A 2017 study of the National Registry of Exonerations found that blacks who were convicted of murder were 50% more likely to be innocent than whites who were convicted of murder. 50%. What would those little whispers say to that? Probably something like, murder's different. But is it? Well, let's take a look at illegal drug possession. Studies have shown for decades that blacks and whites use illegal drugs at almost exactly the same rates. The 2017 study by the National Registry of Exonerations found that despite using illegal drugs at the same rates, blacks were 5 times more likely to be found guilty of illegal drug possession than whites. And if that black person was innocent, they were 12 times more likely than an innocent white to be convicted. What are those little whispers saying now? What are those little voices saying? Probably something like, we're doing the best we can. But are we? A 2020 study of the National Registry of Exonerations found that in 54% of the cases that they studied, the reason for the conviction was official misconduct. 54%. The number one reason they found in 44% of the cases was the failure to turn over exculpatory evidence. That's evidence that would show the defendant is not guilty, that he's innocent. Police officers were responsible for 35% of the misconduct. They were responsible for most of the misconduct during interrogation, the most witness tampering, and a fair amount of the failure to turn over exculpatory evidence. Prosecutors were responsible 30% of the time. They were responsible for most of the failure to turn over exculpatory evidence and misconduct at trial. What does this all mean? Where do we go from here? I believe we're certainly not going to solve this problem in a 10-minute TED Talk, but I believe that we have to understand that the system is set up this way. It's not flawed. It's functioning exactly as it was intended. And because of that, we can't just allow it or hope that it changes by luck into something that treats everyone fairly. We're going to have to do that deliberately and methodically. And I suggest, now again, we're not going to solve this in a 10-minute TED Talk, but I have a couple suggestions about good first steps to take to start this process. I call them Nobody's Perfect, More Than Meets the Eye, and your ABCs. When we're young, we're told that nobody's perfect because everybody makes mistakes. And this has important consequences at a criminal legal trial that you're maybe not understanding, and that it's very important, critical actually, to understand. Even if everyone is involved in a trial, the prosecutor, the witnesses, the judge, the defense lawyer, the court officers, the jurors, even if everyone is educated, experienced, well-rested, committed, like they're well-intentioned, even in those ideal circumstances, wrongful convictions can and do still occur. And this happens because we are imperfect, anything we create, any organization or process we create is also imperfect. So, as I said a moment ago, it's critical to understand, and personally I believe it's really the critical first step, is to understand that wrongful convictions occur even under ideal circumstances. Now, once you understand this, the next step is what I call more than meets the eye. And like my example from a few minutes ago, where that one case turned into 4 or 5 and then turned into potentially many, many more, we have to start looking at cases like the NTSB treats a plane crash, and treat it as systemic by default rather than treating it as a one-off. And that's where more than meets the eye comes in. That instead of seeing one case and seeing one case, when we see that one case and we see the error, we have to automatically assume there are hundreds, if not thousands of cases just like it with the same error. And when we start to do that, when you start to see wrongful convictions happen in under ideal circumstances, and they happen at scale, you then need to start to address the biases that you bring to this analysis. And that's where the ABCs come in. A is for assume nothing, B is for believe nothing, and C is for challenge everything. Now look, we all have a load of biases. There's some we realize that we have, and there's a whole bunch that we don't even realize. So eliminating them is just not going to happen. It's just not realistic. But what we can do is we can adopt processes that try to minimize them and reduce them. And that's this ABC concept that I use. Now, you need to assume nothing. You can't assume people have a good reason for doing something. B, believe nothing. Just if it's not corroborated, if you don't see it, if there's not some evidence to support it, I'm not going to believe it. Or C, challenge everything. It doesn't matter who's involved. It could be the greatest trial lawyer ever. You can't assume that they're doing the right thing. You have to challenge their conduct. Or it could be a police officer who's got medals and tons of commendations. But if you see something wrong, you have to challenge it. It doesn't matter who it is. It doesn't matter what's going on. You have to challenge it. Assume nothing, believe nothing, challenge everything. Now, are these simple steps going to cure everything? No, they are not. But I truly believe that they're good first steps in addressing a problem that's going to take us a long time to rectify. And if the goal is to treat everyone fairly, and I believe it is and should be, once we start on this journey, once we start seeing errors in the criminal legal system as systemic by default, instead of one-offs and bad apples, we will have begun the journey to real change.